Hi friends, Krista here. Thanks for stopping by Books and Jams. Today I'm going to tell you about the books that I read in the month of February. I'm a little bit late for a February wrap-up, but it is what it is. February was a pretty crazy month, as many of you know, because my brother was in the hospital for most of the month, and he's the one that lives here with me. And so it was a pretty emotional and draining month, and yet somehow I still was able to read 11 books, plus one DNF. So I will quickly talk about the DNF first, because I'm not going to read this book, and I'm a little sad because it's the book that I chose for the BookTube spin. It was number 15, and I tried to get into it a couple different times, and I just found it so boring and very confusing, and I did not have the headspace for it. So it's possible that someday I'll pick this book up again, but right now I'm just feeling like, and after talking to a couple other people who also didn't care for it, I think I'm just going to unhaul it. I know it's a well-loved book by quite a few people, but Life After Life by Kate Atkinson was the one that got chosen for the BookTube spin, and I just don't think I'm going to read it. At least not right now. I'm unhauling it. So that was my DNF for February. I maybe got 20. No, I think I got 60, 65 pages in before I decided I was not going to continue. So that's the only downer. The rest of the books during the month of February were fantastic. Right at the beginning of the month, I read a graphic novel called When Stars Are Scattered by Victoria Jameson with Omar Mohammed. Victoria Jameson is the author and illustrator of Roller Girl, which I've really enjoyed. And Omar Mohammed, this is his memoir. So this is a graphic memoir. I love this art style. It's very appealing to me. Omar and his brother Hassan are were refugees from Somalia. They spent a number of years in a refugee camp in Kenya. So this chronicles their journey from Somalia to Kenya. What happened? Why did they have to leave their home, their village? How they got separated from their mother? What happened to their father? We learned all about their story. Hassan has some mental difficulties. He is nonverbal. He says very few words. He's also, however, the most loving and friendly boy. He just hugs everybody that's in the refugee camp. And Omar spends all of his time taking care of Hassan and making sure they have what they need. They have kind of a foster mom who lives in the tent next to them at the refugee camp. She's their legal guardian. Someone from the camp, one of the staff, comes and talks to Omar about going to school because he hasn't up until this point gone to school. And so it's Omar beginning his education and kind of falling in love with learning and hoping to make a way for them to eventually get to America by getting good grades and doing what he can do of filling out the application and everything. So I really learned a lot about life at a refugee camp, what that was like, especially the differences for boys and girls at this time, like how they were treated differently, and the expectations that were on young women as opposed to young men at this time. I also shared this book with the two of the kids from the family that I nanny, and they both really enjoyed it as well. This was fantastic. Really, really good. I picked this up because I saw it in the mock Newbery group that I'm a part of on Goodreads, and a few people were saying that they were hoping that this would win a Newbery, and I don't believe that it did this year, but it's a spectacular story with gorgeous artwork. So I would very much recommend that one. I finished up a trilogy with Emily from Novelle Novels. We read this trilogy together. And so I finished with Emily's Quest by Ella Montgomery. This is the third in the Emily novels. And in this one, Emily is finished with high school and is now trying to make her way in the world. And we kind of follow how her friendships with different people have progressed and changed, including a love interest and an older gentleman that has expressed interest in her. And she sets up house, and a lot of sadness in this one, a lot of frustration and miscommunication that leads her to make decisions that she later kind of goes back on. I kind of match this cover. Look at my nails are the same as her shirt, and my shirt matches the background. Silly. Some people say that they like the Emily books better than Anne of Green Gables, and I am definitely not in that camp. I wholeheartedly love Anne way more. I actually only gave this book 3 stars. I liked the first Emily book, but the second 2 books, there's a storyline in them that involves an older man who has interest in Emily, and it just creeped me out, and I couldn't deal with it. I couldn't get past it. So that was a big downer for me. I did like Emily and her character growth throughout the 3 novels, but Definitely did not like it more than Anne. But I liked seeing her progression as becoming a writer and all of that. So that was fun. The next book that I finished in February was one of my most anticipated reads for the winter, and that is You Have a Match by Emma Lord. This was a cute story. I think I only ended up giving it 3 stars. We follow Abby, who is a teenager who gets her DNA tested because her best friend Leo wants to learn more about his family. I think he was adopted or something. I forget what now, but so she does it kind of in solidarity with him. But she learns that she has a sister, like a full sister. And how did that happen? Like, same parents. She's never met her, never heard anything about her. Ends up starting to communicate with this girl, and they go to this summer camp that Leo also goes to as well. So there's a little bit of a romance, friendship between her and Leo, and also this discovery of a new sister and working that out and trying to figure out what happened back in their parents' younger years that separated these two girls. So it was cute, not earth-shattering, but I enjoyed it. The next book is one that I listened to on audio, and it's Beneath a Scarlet Sky by Mark Sullivan. This one came highly recommended by you guys at the beginning of the year in my recommendations, asking you guys for recommendations. A handful of you, quite a few of you picked Beneath a Scarlet Sky. But then in particular, I asked my patron, one level of my patrons every month for a recommendation and put them all in a hat and pick one out. And this is the one that I picked. So Beneath a Scarlet Sky is a World War II historical fiction. It's by Mark Sullivan. It's set in Italy, and we follow in particular this young man named Pino Lala. And Pino is sent away to kind of a boarding school type of thing up in the mountains because his hometown becomes unsafe. While there, he starts leading refugees out of Italy across the mountains into Switzerland, into safety. And so we kind of follow him in that process. He really grows up a lot in this book and becomes a part of the resistance. It was an enthralling story. I was definitely captivated from beginning to end. I listened to it on audio. The audio was great. I don't remember if I gave this 4 or 5 stars, but I really, really enjoyed it. And it has a very red cover, which Chantel at An Intentional Life, her Read Your Bookshelves Challenge prompt for February was read a book with red and on it. And I definitely did that with this book. So good. Definitely a great recommendation. So thank you for all of you who recommended that. I finally read a book that has been on many, many TBRs over the last couple years, and that was The Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead. This is another book that has quite a red cover. Okay, this is a difficult book to describe because I can't say that I enjoyed it or loved it because it was very raw and hard to read at times. So we follow Cora, who is on this plantation, and Colson Whitehead does not hold back about some of the horrors that happen to enslaved people. And Cora, her mother is kind of legendary because she's the only woman who escaped from that plantation. There were like bounty hunters basically who would track down runaways and bring them back. And some of the punishments that happened on this plantation in particular, but in general, were horrifying and really, really tough to swallow and read about. At one point, this man named Caesar invites Cora to kind of run away with him, and they do. And throughout escaping, they learn about this underground railroad, which is a literal railroad that runs underground. Each stop, we learn about what happens to them at a different place. So there's a time that they spend in South Carolina, and then they are in North Carolina for a while, and then Tennessee, and then Indiana, I believe. And interspersed with all that, we have chapters surrounding some different people. So the very last chapter is about Cora's mother. There's a chapter about Ridgway, the bounty hunter guy who's not bounty hunter. I shouldn't say that because they're not criminals, but yeah, the man who tried to track them down and what's some of his backstory. I I ended up giving this 4 stars. I feel like it's such an important read and I'm glad that I read it. I didn't feel like I got into her emotions. I felt like she was kind of holding me at a distance, which I don't blame her. Having gone through a lot of the things and seen so many of the things that she saw, I feel like I was held at a distance as a reader, and that's okay. But I think if I had connected a little more emotionally to the story, I mean, I was feeling emotions, don't get me wrong. I was feeling a lot of emotions, but I still felt, I don't know, I felt like I was held at arm's distance a little bit. And it took me a little more headspace to read it. I had to think about it a little more, and that's a good thing as well. It definitely was not an escapist read where I could sit down and just escape into the story, and I didn't want to. But yeah, so important and so well done. I think I ended up giving it 4 stars. Glad that I read it finally, because it's been on lots of TBRs. The next one that I have here is a library book that is another one of my most anticipated reads for the winter, and that's The Children's Blizzard by Melanie Benjamin. I think I also gave this one 4 stars. In January of 1888, in the Plains area, like the Dakotas in Kansas, there was this freak blizzard that happened. And it happened right at the time that children were being sent home from school, or right about the time that they might have been released from school. And it was a weird day because it started out like in the middle of January. It's pretty cold in that area, but this day seemed a little more balmy, and kids went to school with their lighter shawls instead of their heavy wool things. But then right at this school letting out time, right in the early afternoon, this freak storm showed up very quickly with gale force winds and super low temperatures and lots of snow and hail. And it was incredibly dangerous, and a lot of people died and animals died, and unfortunately a lot of children died because they had been let out of school. So in this story, we follow 2 different sisters, one in the South Dakota area, the Dakotas, and one in Nebraska, I think. And these 2 sisters made decisions that were very different from each other, and we kind of watched the fallout of that. And it's also interesting, this happened to a lot of, at the time, a lot of the people who lived here in the Plains in this area were immigrants. They were kind of misled in the descriptions and the advertisements that brought them to the Midwest. So a lot of these people speak different languages and have a lot of different cultures represented, and really, really struggled with life, with this new farming life. And then something like this happens that just made it so much worse. And we also follow a newspaper man who was one of the ones who wrote some of the advertisements, and how, like, the emotions of realizing that he kind of he suckered people into it. But also there were newspaper articles written making some of these young school teachers heroes. And a lot of that was based on true fact, which was pretty cool. So it is a fictionalized story of these events, but it is based on a real blizzard that happened. And I was captivated by this story. I didn't give it 5 stars. There was a couple parts that were a little bit slow, and I didn't care as much about the newspaper man and his storyline, but I loved these 2 sisters. And yeah, my heart broke for them. I mean, these teachers that had to deal with the situation were just teenagers themselves, often 16, 17, 18 years old, quite young women having to make life-changing decisions. And for some who let the kids try to go home, and then all of those kids being caught in this blizzard, some surviving, some not, like how hard that would be. Whew, I can't even imagine. Definitely glad that I read that one. I'm talking a lot. I still have 5 more to go. Okay. Next, I read a book that I have been highly anticipating as well, and that's Pride, which is a Pride and Prejudice remix by E.B. Zaboy. I enjoyed this. It was not as great as I hoped it was going to be. I didn't love it as much as I hoped. So we follow this main character, Zuri Benitez, and she lives in Brooklyn with her many sisters and their parents. And this rich family, the Darcys, move in across the street. In this book, so you get the whole Pride and Prejudice story, or a lot of the Pride and Prejudice story, but it also deals with gentrification and like the neighborhood changing as wealthy people are moving in, not just white wealthy people, but Black wealthy people as well, and how that changes the neighborhood and how Zuri feels about it. So I thought this was a cute story, 3 stars. I would recommend reading it because I think it's a fun story, but I didn't quite like it as much as I hoped I was going to. One that I did love, which I'm not going to tell you how I rated it, but I did read The Stationery Shop by Marjan Kamali. This is one of my 5-star predictions. And so I'm not going to tell you what I ended up giving this one. I did listen to it on audiobook, which I loved. This takes place in Tehran in the 1950s in the midst of a lot of political upheaval. And a lot of people are siding with the prime minister and a lot of people are siding with the new government that's trying to come in. But in the midst of that, we follow Roya, who's a young girl, and she just wants to have an education and she loves the poetry of Rumi. She goes into the stationery shop and the owner kind of sees potential for a budding romance between Roya and another boy that goes into the shop all the time named Baman. And I'm sorry for butchering their names. That's why I loved listening to the audiobook. So the stationery owner provides them with opportunities to be alone for a few minutes, which just isn't heard of in 1950s Tehran between a boy and a girl, and also helps develop their friendship and budding romance. But then something happens. They agree to meet at this square one day, but a riot breaks out in the square. Roya is waiting there for Baman to show up, and he just doesn't show up. And their lives take different routes from there. But then we kind of come back together and see them at the end of their lives in their 70s. I believe Baman is in his 70s. Yeah, so she had gotten married. They moved to America. He also moved to America. We kind of see what happened to their lives. This was lovely. This book was lovely, but I won't tell you full details. Just know that it was worth the read. I did give 5 stars to As Sure as the Dawn by Francine Rivers. This is another third book in a trilogy. Buddy read this with Katie from Life Between Words. We read this whole trilogy together. It's maybe the 3rd or 4th or 5th time that I've read through the Mark of the Lion trilogy. In this one, we follow Atreides, who is a gladiator that we meet in the first 2 books. So I can't tell you too much about this other than that it's his story. And I loved it so much. It does definitely, for lack of a better word, get a little preachy. I mean, it's a Christian fiction, and it does definitely get into the gospel at the end, and I loved that about it. It seemed to fit with the story for me, but I know for other people it might not be their thing, but I definitely really loved seeing Atreides kind of open up his heart, both to people and relationships, as well as to the Lord. So I loved this book so much. I love the whole series. So good. My patron book club this month was From Scratch by Tembi Locke. This is a nonfiction memoir written by Tembi Locke and also read by Tembi Locke. I listened to this on audio as well. And this is, as it says, a memoir of love, Sicily, and finding home. And I thought that this was a beautiful story. I think I ended up giving this one 4 stars. Tembi just tells about her time in Sicily or Italy. When she was in college, she spent a semester abroad. While there, she meets Sazo, who becomes her husband, and it tells their love story. And then Sazo gets cancer and dies. And you kind of see that very early on in the book. And then they have had a daughter. They adopted a daughter. And so really, Tembi wrote this book for her daughter, kind of as a love story of their life and of Sicily and how she fell in love with Sicily and with the dad, with Sazo, and how they moved forward after such a horrible experience of losing someone. I will say the scene where Sazo actually passes and Tembi is there with him, like that was one of the most beautiful death scenes I maybe have ever read. It was stunning. I feel like a lot of this was written just so beautifully. And how food and creating food in Sicily with Sazo's mother, her mother-in-law, and how that mother-in-law relationship grew throughout the story and changed. Oh, it just had a lot of really wonderful moments. I loved it. I cried a couple times, but I just thought that it was so well done. Really nice. Really nice. And at the end of the month, I squeezed in one last book because I had planned on reading this with Rainey. And then I said, hey, after everything happened with my brother, I was like, Rainey, do you mind if we pause on that? She said, sure. And then I was like, hey, actually, do you mind if we read it really quickly at the end of the month? She said, sure. So thank you, Rainey, for being so flexible and reading with me. And we busted out The Winter of the Witch by Catherine Arden right at the end of the month. I could not find this on audio, so I read this in print, large print to be honest. This is the third in a series, so again, I can't tell too much about it, but I did vlog a little bit about this because I was vlogging that weekend that I read this. I read it all in one weekend. We continue to follow Vasilisa, who we follow in the first book, and there's still a continual struggle between the church and Russian tradition slash folklore slash spirits that they kind of believe in. And that clash is a big part of this as well. And Vasilisa trying to merge those two parts of her life and her world. The author's note I found to be so interesting because while this is based in a lot of Russian folklore, it's also very historical. And Catherine Arden shared some of the things that were very true I think I shared some of it in the vlog, but there's this battle at the end. It's a real battle that happened. And the battle started out with one guy from each side coming to the middle to fight. And that really happened. And some of the characters were real historical people changed to fit into this historical fiction. I guess you can call it historical fiction because it's based on historical fact, but it also has a lot of influence in the Russian folklore as well, which I think is really, really cool. So I'm glad that I finished up another trilogy. So I finished three trilogies in February, which is awesome. I can't tell you about Historathon and which of these fit the different prompts because honestly, once Jordan was in the hospital, I did not pay any attention to Historathon anymore. But, so let's see. Historical fiction. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So even though I didn't really pay much attention to the bingo board anymore, 6 of these 11 books were historical fiction. And that's the point, right? To read historical fiction. So I say that's a win. So here are the 11 books that I read in the month of February. Quite a few of them have to go back to the library. They're a little bit overdue, but there's no such thing as fines right now in my library, so I'm not that worried, but I do want to return them. So I would love to chat with you in the comments below. Have you read any of these? Did you feel the same way as I did on any of them, or did you feel differently? Are you adding any of them to your TBR? Let's chat down in the comments below. You guys know I love talking with you down there. Be sure to give this video a thumbs up. Check out all the information in the description about ways to connect with me and ways to support my channel. I love you guys so much and thank you so much for all of your kind words and support along the way. And I will be talking with you in another video very soon. Bye.